upmixing and center channel retention.
Yeah, so that's step 2.
So that is step 2.
And sometimes we use these things in conjunction. Sometimes we use them together.
Correct.
Because so if you're going to do 2-seat, you throw delays away. This is just we just don't do it.
You can't. Right. Because there's no reason to delay something.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's not a 2-seat thing because it fixes distance by compensating for distance directly. And we have a symmetrical but opposite distance problem.
So when we use the term upmixing,
yeah,
what does that, there again, an Andy explanation of what does that mean? Why is that a thing, and how come it's not easy to do?
In a general sense, upmixing is simply taking two channel stereo, and turning it into more channels. That's upmixing.
Okay.
Upmixing. Yeah. That one channel or two channels to more channels.
I feel like there's a lot of math behind it, though.
Yeah, there is, and it's math that I can't do.
Well, but it's not as easy as just taking left and putting right and combining the two together and flipping something at 180.
No.
And just
if it was that easy. So I see this happening on Facebook all the time. People who are going to like DIY their own upmixer. Yes. They're going to do it they're going to do it. And I tried this years ago when I was a retail installer. There was a thing called Dynaquad. This is 30-something years ago, and there have been all kinds of upmixed and surround algorithms and whatever. But years ago, before we had DSPs, all we really had in order to extract signals or change signals was polarity. So we could EQ, we had EQs and whatnot, but we didn't have delay. We didn't have a digital delay because audio was analog. So ambience channels. So we'd have left and right in the front, and then to make an ambience channel, we had to make a mess behind us. We had to make a mess behind us so that we didn't hear the actual stereo come from the front, but we heard some ambient information. Because when we hear sound in an environment.
Mm-hmm.
But depending on what we're doing in that environment, we may or may not pay attention to the actual sound in the environment.
Okay.
Right. So let's say you're running through the woods and you're being chased by a bear.
Okay.
Scary. Are you gonna be tuned into the sound behind you?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Because there's a freaking bear back there.
Yeah.
Right. But there are occasions where, when you go to the grocery store, how are you tuned into the sound of the grocery store?
No, it's just coming from the ceiling.
It's there's just noise everywhere, but you're there to get a can of tomatoes and some other crap, and
always a can of tomatoes.
Some stuff that you're embarrassed to buy because whatever, and you're getting out of there, right? So we don't always listen intently to the sound that we hear in spaces, but the sound that we hear in spaces is how we navigate the space. It helps our eyes, right? We have eyes in the front, but with our ears we can hear things that happen behind us and above us and whatever. So all this sort of works together to make it possible for us to make sense of where we are, whether the room is big or small, or where the door. Yeah. So, but we don't always do this consciously. I kind of lost my train of thought. So we're talking about upmixing.
Yes, we're talking about upmixing. We're talking about space.
So yeah, I don't know why I'm telling that story. Anyway.
Well, because I'm assuming we were getting to the point where you were going to talk about in a car how, if it was easy, because that's what we're talking about, if we just add left minus right and all that. Sorry.
So what we're trying to do with early upmixing, like Dynaquad or whatever, is we're trying to put some ambient sounds in the back, right? So it sounds like we're in a room. Right. In a stereo recording, sometimes the sound of the room is captured in the recording, but because there are only two channels, it can only be presented as a room inside that space between the left and the right channel. Right. So if we need more channels and we want to try to reproduce some kind of a 3D thing, then we need to put speakers in the back so that we can have ambient sounds back there. But there was no discrete way to make ambient sounds for the back, so they would just put the two back speakers out of phase. And when things are out of phase, we don't hear. So when you have two speakers out of phase, you don't hear bass, right? We all hear that. But when you have two speakers and they're out of phase, you also don't hear an image in the center.
Okay.
Right? Because it doesn't work. So if you put the speakers in the back and you put them out of phase, then you don't really hear the center image in the back.
Right. It just becomes that.
It just becomes a big acoustic sort of a mess. And we kind of say that it sounds like ambient sounds from the room or whatever. So that was early surround. And then And then upmixing became. Then there was surround sound for movies, and you had to go to the movies to watch a movie and to hear it in surround. And on the film there would be 7 additional audio tracks, and that would be center and left and right and sides and rears and whatever. But you couldn't experience that at home. We didn't have unless you were super rich and you could afford a projectionist in your own theater and whatever. And I guess there have always been people rich enough to go to Mars. But so the people who do movies wanted people to be able to enjoy something like that at home. And at home we had VHS and Betamax tapes, and on those tapes there's only 2 audio tracks, right? So what they wanted to be able to do was to place discrete sounds behind you, right? So if the movie is you're being chased by a bear through the woods, that the bear actually shows up in the back.
Right.
So the way that happened was that the bear sound would be encoded or mixed onto those 2 audio tracks, the left and right track, out of phase. And then the upmixer would pull the bear out because it could tell that the bear was the same in the left and the right channels in the back, but out of phase. It would pull that out and send that to rear speakers. So that was the beginning of actual upmixing. So this was really designed for film. And it went from that to now, in order for one person to sit on one side of the couch and the other person to sit on the other side of the couch, kind of like we do in cars. And for the dialogue to sound like it comes from the screen, which is in front of both of us, that a center channel was really helpful. And the center channel in an upmixer like that was really designed to anchor the dialogue at the screen. Yeah. They're not so concerned about left of center and right of center and where's the guitar and where's the bass and all that kind of stuff. They're trying to get dialogue at the screen, other stuff that happens in the left and the right in a sort of a wide stage, and a way to put discrete sounds in the back. And that was Dolby Pro Logic. Dolby Pro Logic 2, Logic 7 from Harman. These are all what they call active matrix upmixers.
And I always love it when I'm watching a football game and they decide to pipe the crowd into the rear speakers. Yeah. Because my rear speakers sit right above my head and I'll be editing and I'm like, what the?
Right. Right. So those active matrix upmixers were really good for video.
Yes.
But they were not so good for audio.
Because the data wasn't in the recording.
Well, it's not right. And so people who mix music do stuff. They do stuff to try to widen the stage, and they have an intent when they use this. Like if you've ever listened to a recording where sometimes, during the verses, you'll hear the singer in the center. Mm-hmm. And then during a chorus, maybe you hear that same singer in the left and the right, but not in the center. Right?
Correct. Yeah.
So the way you do that when you make a recording is that you delay one channel versus the other, and then you don't hear a center image, right? Because it's not in phase anymore. Now you hear the singer over here and the singer over here, but you don't hear the singer in the center. So when you do that and you play it back through one of those legacy active matrix upmixers, it doesn't do exactly what the guy who mixed that intended. What he intended was for it to be in the center during the verse and in the left and right during the chorus. But the upmixer will steer some of that to the rear speakers. And when the guy who mixed that piece of music hears that, he goes, "No, that's not what I did. This thing sucks." Mm-hmm. Right? This is not what the artist intended. What the artist intended was for there to be no difference between the loudest sound and the quietest sound, so you can't even hear the drums anymore. Don't get me started on that.
No.
Anyway,
I'm not.
But
you maybe did go down that rabbit hole too, because when you started talking about the loudness wars and all that, a couple of years ago, I had to go read all of that.
Oh, and I know
we won't
posted something about that. But
I know. I was like,
this is another topic.
Yeah, we won't go into that.
Anyway. So the people who made music didn't like what these legacy upmixers did to music because it would decode in a way that they didn't intend. Right. So now there are a bunch of new upmixers for music, and they're much better for music. And now we have Atmos for music, which is discrete, and this is an even more complicated thing. But it's cool. And if you have Atmos at home, I mean, I wasn't sure I was game for this. When I bought my my home stereo, I was going to be a 2-channel guy. That lasted like 3 weeks. And then I was like, oh, I got to have sides and rears. And I was using Dolby Pro Logic 2, and that wasn't good enough. So I called some buddies and I bought a high-end Marantz processor, and that was cool, but I didn't like any of those upmixers. And finally I put a PC in my home theater so I could use our upmixer for music.
Okay.
For music. So upmixing for music and upmixing for cars is, so if you get an Atmos mix, then what you get is somebody's intended distribution of all these sounds, in the front and the sides and the rear and whatever else, because that's what Atmos does.
Right.
But upmixing is a way for us to try to glean from a 2-channel recording what a more 3-dimensional experience of listening to that event might be.
Okay.
Right? So what we're in upmixing for music, what we're trying to do is use clues that are in the 2-channel recording to help us make this more believable. So it's kind of creation.
Right.
It's kind of creation. There's no right way and wrong way to do it. Except that there's one standard that I know of for upmixing, and this is a broadcast standard. So when you watch the game and you watch it in 5.1 or Atmos or whatever, however it's being broadcast, have you ever like watched TV and it was broadcast in multi-channel, but you didn't have multi-channel? And you only had a 2-channel system to listen to it on, and you kept having to turn the volume up and down and up and down and up and down because you couldn't hear the dialogue. And then there would be like the dinosaur would come in, and the footsteps, all the bass, the low frequency stuff was so loud you have to turn it down, but you have to turn it back up to hear the dialogue and down, right? That happens when the broadcast upmixer doesn't down mix back to stereo. So there's an ITU standard, and I can't remember the number. There's an ITU standard that says for broadcasting, an upmixer should down mix back to stereo perfectly, so that when they stream it in multi-channel and your audio system isn't multi-channel, that you can at least listen to it in stereo and have it work.
Right. That's
the only actual standard for upmixing I know of, and this is only for broadcast.
Right.
Right. So I kind of think that what an upmixer should do. And my guess is that some of the music creators also sort of feel this way, is that the upmixer shouldn't change the actual recording.
Right.
But that it should spread the music out over some number of channels to achieve some other end. And I kind of think that end is better believability.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Right. I mean, so that's kind of how it works for me. If I'm listening to some live recording, and it sounds like the Rose Bowl is in between the speakers in the front, and I'm there with 60,000 other people, and a third of those people are sitting behind me because I couldn't afford the super duper seats in the front. The experience in 2-channel of listening to the music is fine, but you don't really get the experience of the space in which you're listening, and that's kind of, for me, what upmixing is about.
So
in a car, so for upmixing, there's the immersive quality, right? There's the sense of space that you can get when you have speakers in the sides and speakers in the back, and you can send something specific back there. But the other benefit, which is just like what we were talking about earlier, is, and it was part of multi-channel or surround for movies, is that if you've got a cinema with 400 seats in it, there can't be one great seat.
Right.
There need to be more seats.
Right.
So the center channel, the center speaker, is really designed to make it possible for everybody in the theater to experience something that's similar.
Okay.
So that's what the center does. So upmixing in cars gets us a couple of things. One is that the center speaker makes it possible for somebody in the passenger seat and the driver's seat to experience something similar, and even in the back seats. But the side speakers and the rear speakers give us an opportunity to make a sense of space that's more believable, so that we'll never be out of the car. I don't know that we'll ever get to the point where you can sit in a car and have it sound exactly, if you close your eyes, exactly like you're in the Rose Bowl, because there are too many reflecting surfaces in the cars, and that's how we hear that we're in a car. We can't get rid of those.
Right.
But if we add some other sounds that arrive later, then we can sort of fool ourselves into believing that we're hearing something similar to how it might have been to hear that live. right? So the idea of immersion is to make the audio experience sound more similar to what we might hear if we heard it live, because every time we hear audio, we hear it in a space.
Yes.
Whether that space is the DMV, whether we're listening to the awful noise of 1,200 cell phones all playing something different at the DMV, or we're at the Rose Bowl listening to the Rolling Stones, we hear it in a space. And the idea of immersion is to give the listener some ability to discern what that original space might have been.